If you were gaming in the 80s up through the mid-90s and loved Star Trek, you probably noticed a distinct lack of Starship simulation games. Nearly every Star Trek game released for a home console fit into the adventure category, and like most licensed games, they often weren't great. By the late 90s, the critical PC hit Star Trek Starfleet Command rocked the gaming community, being touted as the Star Trek simulator the world had been waiting for. However, this wasn't the first game in the series. That honor goes to Star Trek Starfleet Academy Starship Bridge Simulator. This is Retro Impressions and Reviews, a show dedicated to answering if video games from the past are still worth your time today. Captain's Log, Stardate 9973.19. You are a young cadet starting their freshman year at Starfleet Academy. Do you have what it takes to graduate? This game aims to answer that question. This was originally developed by Interplay for release on the Super Nintendo in early 1995, with a release coming later in the year for the 32X. This isn't exactly a direct port though, as High Voltage Software, who is known for their high quality game conversions, did the work. Getting into the main menu, you have the opportunity to start a new game, resume a game using the password save system, use the simulator, or mess around with a standard set of options. First up, let's have a look at the main game. The first thing you're required to do is choose your gender, name, and skill level. The main hub is set up in a point-and-click adventure style containing icons that represent the 5 locations you can frequent. Starting on the left, you have the classroom. Here you can look at your transcripts and listen to a lecture detailing the things that will be relevant as you take on each mission. Next is the briefing room, where you receive the mission briefings and can ask questions regarding them. This is also where you come when you're ready to start the test. Next up is the Academy Lounge. Here you can chat with your crew and Jones, the lounge host. It's fairly important you do this right after a mission, because returning to your quarters before stopping by here will roll the day forward, bypassing all conversations and added story bits you can experience. I honestly didn't figure this out until I was in my senior year, so don't make the same mistake I did. There's also a great game of pool you can play. In fact, it's so good, I would call it the best pool experience on the 32X. Once you've finished a mission and talked to everyone you care to, it's time to head to your quarters, where you'll find a fair amount of information on various ships, species, crew members, and information about various governments. You can also quit the game to the title screen and view your password. I recommend snapping a picture of the screen with your smartphone for easy password management. The final option allows you to access the same simulation menu that's available on the startup screen. So back to the game. The story mode contains 21 missions in total, spread out over the course of 4 school years. Go to class, prep to take the test, and take the exam. It's all presented as simulated missions, exactly like the one in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. In fact, the Kobayashi Maru is the final exam you're required to take your senior year. Each test has a max possible score of 100 points. Depending on how and what you do, your score can vary. Small things such as returning to base with your weapon still online will result in a few docked points, while failing the mission outright by losing your ship or not completing the mission requirements will result in a big fat 0. No matter what you score though, you will still move on to the next class and test. You must maintain a passing grade over the course of all 5 missions in order to move up to the next school year. Fail to do this and you'll be required to repeat that grade. The scenarios are all fairly well thought out, and in true Star Trek form, a number of missions require diplomacy over brute force. There are standard combat missions along with rescue, scouting, scientific research, diplomacy, simulated wars, and investigations. This makes for a great mix of some truly engaging experiences. The real question here is if this game is right for you. I hope to answer that. If you're here as a Star Trek fan or as someone who was already on the fence before you even started this video, then without a doubt pick this game up. The game does have issues that I'll cover in a minute, but every scenario in this game is great fun and without a doubt worth experiencing. This is a full-on Star Trek sim where you captain a ship while making decisions that can result in multiple endings depending on your aggregate exam scores. The ship itself has a ton of functionality, allowing you to do just about anything you'd want to or desire to. You have complete control over the helm, weapons, engineering, and communications. If you want to reroute power to the weapons, you can make it so. As the mission requirements vary, there is ample opportunity to fly a variety of ships that all have a distinct feeling to them. This brings us back to the simulation menu. Here you can choose to do combat training in both single and 2-player mode. This lets you captain and battle every ship in the game. Do you want to fly a Klingon battle cruiser while taking on a Federation science vessel? You can do that. How about a Romulan warship versus a Klingon bird of prey? You betcha. You can also fly Tholian, Venturi, and Gorn ships, something that's exclusive to the 32X release. There is also 3 special scenarios taken right from the series. Balance of Terror is borrowed from the original series episode of the same name, while the Wrath of Khan and Undiscovered Country scenarios are taken from the movies. This was the last Star Trek game released on a Sega console, and the only home console release for the series by its developer Interplay, besides Star Trek 25th Anniversary on the NES. This game was so well thought of that a remake headed by Brian Fargo would release for the PC and Mac in 1997, with the original series cast starring in full motion video cutscenes. So let's talk about some common complaints. A fair amount of people seem to be put off by the visuals. Maybe when this game was new in 1995, it wasn't what people were looking for, as a lot of games were panned when they didn't meet a certain graphical expectation. It really seemed to be graphics at the expense of nearly everything else during the period in which this game released, and this wasn't really pushing the system. Still, all these years later, I find that it's held up fairly well. I really like the look of the bridge, and while the visuals we do see through the view screen are not spectacular, they do a fair enough job not to degrade the experience the game intends to give. One major flaw is the awful hit detection. It's quite easy to collide with things such as a space station or planet, while still feeling like you're a good distance away. It's annoying, but once it happens a couple of times, you'll get down how close you can actually get before it becomes dangerous. My advice here would be approach these objects with caution. The manual doesn't contain anything special outside of 2 particularly odd notes. The first being an off representation of the 6-button controller. There is clearly no start button in that location on any Sega controller that I've seen. The other being no mention of the pool game. It's not locked away or hidden from the player, so all I can figure is that this manual was mostly carried over from the Super Nintendo version, as both manuals were put together by the same person with very little change between them. Still, this is another example of a game made easier to play by reading the manual. It's not a deal breaker without one, but it definitely helps. The final thing is the music. While the sound effects and music are really well done, there are unfortunately only 7 tracks in total, making for a potentially repetitive experience for some people. So knowing this was a port from the Super Nintendo, you might be wondering what has changed and which is the better version. High Voltage did an incredible job bringing this over to the 32X. The visuals have been upgraded, giving the game a more polished and pleasing look. The ships now all sport sleek looking textured polygons that are more in tune with the rest of the game's presentation. The SNES release has a very sluggish feeling to the controls, something that was greatly improved, giving the game a more natural and smooth feeling. The sound quality has been considerably improved. This was a shocker to me, as I've read reviews complaining that the audio remained unchanged from game to game, with the 32X version receiving a rather bad rap because of it. However, this just isn't the case. The sound effects are improved, the audio levels are better balanced, and the music quality is far superior to his SNES brother. It turns out there's a reason for this. Ken Allen scored the soundtrack for the game, but when High Voltage ported it to the 32X, Brian Schmidt was brought in to deal with the sound effects and music portions. This was significant due in part to an audio driver he had written that utilizes one of the 32X's Hitachi SH2 processors as a sample playback music synthesizer, allowing for more complex and higher quality arrangements of Allen's original score. This freshly arranged score took full advantage of the hardware by simultaneously utilizing the Genesis FM sound chip along with the capabilities of the 32X. The end result speaks volumes when compared side by side. Beyond that, the pool game is exclusive to the 32X version, as are a number of ships and species available in simulation mode. The reality is, stepping down from the 32X version to the Super Nintendo release feels like playing an unpolished beta build. That's how huge an improvement the 32X release is over the Super Nintendo. The only pluses the SNES version seems to have over the 32X is a slight, and I mean very slight, increase in draw distance. Your ship physically shakes when taking enemy fire, a feature missing in the 32X release, and finally, a fair amount of people seem to prefer its radar. I personally found it to be lacking in both games, giving the player something more akin to a hot and cold system. It's not precise, but it gets the job done. In the end, I can't help but feel the game would be considered a must-have if not for the Star Trek name being attached to it. It has great scenarios making me wish fan-made content existed so I could continue on in my adventure. I understand this issue though, as I myself am guilty of looking at games just like this one and condemning them to my do not play list without really ever looking past the name. It's due in part to all the terrible licensed games I experienced growing up. Games that were only made to turn a quick buck, ruining so many weekends with rentals and purchases of excessive, unplayable shovelware. Thankfully, this is not one of those experiences. This is a well-made, must-have game for anyone who's interested in this genre, anyone who owns a 32X, anyone who is a Star Trek fan, and finally, anyone who just loves great games. Thanks for watching. Feel free to leave a positive or negative comment letting me know your thoughts. Click subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. If you're interested in staying updated on upcoming projects and channel news, follow me on Twitter. Until next time, I'm Jenovi and this has been Retro Impressions and Reviews.